Muito bom. Olá, bom dia a todos, sejam bem-vindos. Mais um evento da série Desafios da Inovação e Serviços. Hoje nós contamos com a presença do professor Robert Rogowsky, que abordará o tema da economia digital. Com uma atividade de internacionalização, o evento será todo em inglês. O professor Robert, ele é professor na International Trade Program, na Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey, e ele também é professor adjunto e afiliado professor na Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. Dr. Rogowsky é presidente do Instituto de Comércio e Diplomacia Comercial. Estão conosco também a Vera Queiroz, que é pesquisadora, professora formada em educação e pesquisadora no SEST, o Centro de Estudos, Sociedade e Tecnologia. Este evento é uma realização da USP, Universidade de São Paulo, da Escola Politécnica da Universidade de São Paulo, do Departamento de Engenharia de Produção, do LEDS, Laboratório de Estudos em Design de Serviços e de Sustentabilidade, e do CEST, Centro de Estudos, Sociedade e Tecnologia. Professora Vera, você quer fazer uma introdução ao nosso convidado, ilustre convidado, professor Robert, por favor?
Okay, so in English now, right, Robert?
Yeah.
So you can understand what we are talking about.
Thank you.
Today we are honored to have a special guest with us, Robert Rogowsky, Dr. Robert Rogowsky, who has an extensive experience in international trade and economic diplomacy. Dr. Rogowsky is co-program chair and professor of the International Trade and Economic Diplomacy Program at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey. Dr. Rogowsky has been called upon to testify before Congress on matters involving international trade and is a frequent speaker at academic, corporate, and governmental conferences and organizations worldwide. He was also the founder and executive editor of the Journal of International Commerce and Economics, and has published widely on the topics of international trade, competition policy, and regulation. Welcome, Robert, and thank you for your time and availability to talk to us.
It's very good to be here. I apologize I can't do it in Portuguese, but I'll do the best I can in English.
Okay, so we are going to start with questions, of course, dealing with digital economy. So my first question is, what is the digital economy and how does it differ from the traditional economy?
It's a great question. And of course, as you know, one of the most important questions and one of the most difficult questions that trade officials and trade agencies and ministries around the world are dealing with, because the economy in many ways is transferring itself from non-digital to digital, if I can put it that way. A digital economy is the recognition that computers and computer technology and telecommunications technology is becoming so sophisticated and so integrated into how we behave among ourselves in an economic context, but in every social context, simply because it is becoming so capable and so powerful. And the digital economy then is that part of the economy that relies upon this computer technology. That is, information can be turned into digits, sent across any length of space around the world, turned back into information, and communication can take place. So there's two parts to this, of course. One is that we are transferring information this way that is going to remain information. So, for example, if I have an X-ray done here in the United States, it can easily be put into digital form. It is all X-rays are now put into digital form. We don't really keep X-rays. We have a digital copy of the X-ray. It can be sent then to the radiologist to be investigated and understood, and the results sent back to me. That person can be in the next room, or that person can be in France just as easily. So now this digital transactions allow geographic space to become irrelevant. That means that the economics of this, the taking of it, the paying for the services of reviewing it, can now be done across any borders, any geographic space. And so the digital economy, one, makes this much, much more efficient, and two, it eliminates geographic space as a constraint. And so now the world becomes a much flatter space, if I can use Thomas Friedman's a metaphor that the world is flat, meaning that we're all much, much more connected than we were before. And this is a powerful concept, both economically because of productivity and efficiency and cost reductions, and the ability to find the most competent people on any task in the world. But it also creates a policy issue in that now nations have to deal with the fact that the economic imperative is to create these efficiencies across borders and across cultures and across sovereignties, and put into place controls or regulations or customs rules or tariffs, if you will, on how to manage this new dynamic in economic behavior. So that's a significant part of the digital economy, just things that remain digital. But secondly, the real economy, where we're producing things, also becomes tied into the digital economy, simply because the way that this greater computer and telecommunications technology allows us to think about production vastly improves how we can produce and where we can produce and the efficiency of that production. So if I buy a refrigerator here in the United States, it from that store, it can be easily transmitted to the company making the refrigerators, who transmits it immediately to the production line in China that they need to make another refrigerator. And they don't have to make them on guesses. They know exactly where the demand is, the pace of the demand, and exactly where they're going to, how many have to be produced, and exactly where they get delivered. All of this now can produce a form of smart manufacturing that is incredibly productive, incredibly efficient, and incredibly problematic, because now it can be produced across many, many different political borders. And so now the real problem is, how do the policy people across these many political borders interact and negotiate? What kind of economic diplomacy can they put into place? What kind of trade agreements can they put into place to manage and keep up with the remarkable changes in the economics of the digital economy?
Mm-hmm. So it's not something very easy to be done, and it also has to be carefully thought of in order not to have the interference of one country above the other or something like that, right?
Absolutely. And as you nicely point out, this is a difficult question. This is hard to do, because in any change in an economy, whether it's a policy change, whether it's a change in technology, a change in business practice, a change in trade agreements, all of these tend to create winners and losers. It's just the way it works. And in economics, we like to talk about this concept of creative destruction. That is, all these technologies, all these different change in policies to adjust to technologies, create things, but they also destroy old things. And of course, the analogy is automobile was fantastic, but it destroyed the horse and buggy industry. And it's a constant process of creative destruction. So humanity, through its governing processes across many different nations, governing very differently and very protective about their sovereignty, have continuously deal with this idea of technologies and policies that are both creative and benefiting many, and also destructive, because old ways of doing this have to be allowed to die, and the people that are doing them have to make those adjustments. So yes, this is hard work.
What are the key challenges and opportunities for developing countries, developing countries in the digital economy?
Wow, it's a great question, and it's a exciting question in that it is clear that the idea of digital economies and digital trade and rules that govern and provide for more support for the expansion of the digital economy should, in theory, be very good for small countries, small developing countries, island countries, because the digital economy is not as bound by geography to spaces where they have to operate. They can operate from almost anywhere. So a radiologist that I mentioned in my first story could live in France and look at my X-ray, or could live in Bali and look at my X-ray, could live in Vanuatu and look at my X-ray. And so the ability to expand and spread is a tremendous opportunity for developing countries to take advantage of the benefits of this digital economy. Now, we've seen a great deal of this with the vastly growing global supply chains, these global value chains, or sometimes I like the term value networks, because a lot of this is not just a chain of production. It is a value network where many different manufacturing processes and services are being pulled together to serve a chain of production that takes a product from the assembly line to the customer. But this has been a tremendous boon for small countries because the digital part of the production process, the information and computer and telecommunication technology, allows this production process to become spread over geographic space. This becomes even more so with many of these digital products that are purely service-oriented or digital-oriented. And there's no reason why very small and developing countries can't take advantage of that and provide those services to any customer in the world. But of course, the big question is not a decision to join in and do this. The real decision for policy people is to decide, how do we build the capability to compete in that marketplace? And so they have to think, what does it take to compete in that marketplace and provide that to their society, their people? And of course, these require certain amounts of training, education, structural capabilities to provide what businesses need to be provided in these places, the kinds of cities that radiologists and scientists are willing to live in, and the sort of economic foundation that these businesses will need to thrive. And that requires policy changes, institutional structures, legal protections to create an environment that is attractive to people who are able to and want to provide these services in an increasingly sophisticated value chain economy that we have in the world today.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So talking about policies and regulations, what are policies and regulations? Do you think they are essential for fostering a fair and inclusive digital economy?
Yeah, again, a very hard question. But it's a great question. And it's some basic things. One, I mentioned education. So you really have to build an educational system in your country that is focused on the notion of building those capabilities. It doesn't have to be high-class universities. It has to be structures or processes or educational institutions that train people for these business and technology skills, engineering, mathematics, information and communication technology, how businesses operate, finance. And so the things that are basic to how to do business. You need to have, increasingly importantly, you need to have some institutions that are that protect intellectual property, because so much of this technology and so much of the manufacturing that gets done, so much of the technology that allows these communications to take place, to handle the kind of sophisticated business that is going to be possible. You need to have a set of rules in place that support and make modern businesses comfortable. And a lot of that is intellectual property. The ability to have a financial system that works for businesses, rules that allow businesses to bring money in, take money out, bring technology in, take technology out, bring people in, take people out. And so it has to be a much freer sort of environment for international money, people, businesses, assets to be able to move in and out. And then, of course, an environment that is supportive of the services that manufacturing needs or modern business needs. There's a lot of secondary and tertiary services that make an environment that is very attractive for modern capitalism, businesses that can compete across that can go into 6 or 7 possible sites. Why would they choose yours? And they choose yours because you've made it supportive of how their business will operate. And that means local businesses that are focused on how to do those businesses. So you're building a foundation of educational preparation, institutions that modern world-class capitalists are familiar with and comfortable with, and support businesses so that when they come in, they have support for that business to thrive. And so there's layers to this. And some countries have done a very good job with this. In many ways, Brazil is doing a very good job with this. Costa Rica has done a very good job with this. Vietnam is struggling hard to do a good job with this, even though it's a communist country. They're working hard to build that kind of environment. Of course, China has massively built this kind of environment, which makes it such a great target for businesses to go and work in, because they built an environment dedicated to supporting foreign direct investment coming in, the kinds of businesses that I'm talking about. So it's a great opportunity for businesses, but there is an investment that must be made.
What are digital currencies, and how do they fit into the digital economy?
Yeah, complicated. And let me break it down this way. There are, I'll say, cryptocurrencies. That is, these currencies, the most famous of which is Bitcoin. But there are many, many of them. I mean, there are literally maybe hundreds of them. And in fact, I think one candidate in the United States for president, one candidate for president has come up with his own cryptocurrency. Buy this new coin, and you will be, one, supporting the candidate, and secondly, you will now be able to do business in this new candidate-oriented currency. And I won't say who it is, but I will say it's not Kamala Harris. And
no, I was going to ask the question.
So it's easy to make a cryptocurrency. So it's easy to make a currency that gives you an opportunity to exchange things by using this currency, which is what a currency is primarily. It's a medium of exchange. It just allows you and me to exchange something of value. This is the money, so that you give me a product and I can receive that product. And now you have the value of it and you can go buy something else. Very simple. But for more traditional currencies, they are established by governments, and the government's job is to make sure that that currency has value, which is why many currencies are pieces of paper that promise you an amount of gold. Under the gold standard, that's what the currency was. That's what gave the currency value. In 1973, President Nixon took the dollar off of the gold standard, and that pretty much meant the world went off of the gold standard. And so now currencies are essentially limited only by what the government decides to print. And so the government produces the currency, but it's still hard currency. So now the new thing is to blend these two into digital currencies that governments create, and they serve as a form of medium of exchange. So instead of carrying dollars around and using these dollars as a paper currency, I would only have to carry a digital vehicle, that is my phone probably, and use that to signal digitally that I have this much money in the bank, and you, the seller, can now have access to that. I'm giving you access to $100 of this digital account that I have through this digital instrument that I have in my hand. So instead of cash, I will let you have it digitally. Many countries are exploring this idea. They're developing digital currencies. China's working very hard on it. Mm-hmm. The United States is not. They have looked at it and they've decided that they're going to go very slow about a digital currency for the United States to be run by the Federal Reserve Bank. And in part, it's because we have such a sophisticated credit card system that literally that is a digital system, because I have a card that I stick into a little small computer at the store. It tells the computer, this bank will pay you this much money. And that bank has an agreement with me that I will pay that bank back that money. And so it's all digital. And it seems to work fine for Americans. And so we don't feel a need to go into the digital currency. But the digital currency, as a bottom line, is it's basically a way of making that exchange easier without having hard cash in hand. Mm-hmm. I will tell a quick story. I went in to use cash in China last time I was there, and the clerk at the store looked at my Chinese cash and didn't have any idea what to do with it, because they don't use cash. Everyone uses WeChat. And so it's its own form of digital currency. Just like we have Apple Pay, they have WeChat. The store actually didn't know what to do with cash.
Mm. You said China. Is there another country who also uses this type of uses the digital economy very frequently?
Oh,
is it Russia, or am I completely mistaken?
many countries are trying to use digital currencies. And many people must be using the cryptocurrencies. I don't, and I wouldn't. But I think people are using Bitcoin, and it has enough credibility. Sweden is trying hard, with a digital currency. I think China and Russia both are. Many countries want to figure out a way to exchange, and digital currency is an attempt to explore the idea of creating trade among themselves with a currency other than the United States dollar, or of being able to avoid the banking system, which is so heavily dominated by the United States. So a number of European countries, certainly China and Russia, Iran for sure. So countries are exploring how to do this digital currency, because it does seem, I think, to most people that hard currency, hand currency, is becoming obsolete. It's becoming efficient. Like the horse and buggy industry, it's an important industry only for hobbyists, people who like to ride around on horse buggies. Hard currency is going to go the same way. It just becomes expensive and inefficient. And so literally, I don't carry cash. I just almost never have it. Whenever I need it, I have to go look for it somewhere to see if my wife has some somewhere, because I just don't use it. I have gone essentially entirely digital. Georgetown University is a digital campus. Nowhere at Georgetown campus do they accept money. They just don't. So we've gone totally digital there. And I think within not many years, most nations will go entirely digital. So their banks and their central banks now need to figure out, how do we make sure we have a system that is secure? Because there's a lot of risk with the ability to hack into digital systems, and that becomes a problem. So, but there's always risks. There are risks carrying money. And so I think that within the next 10 years, this money will be something just as a historical interest.
Is this what they were talking about at BRICS this year? Or it's something completely different? Because I read something about money, and the money was not the American money, but I didn't understand very well what they were discussing. Is this the case?
Yes, it is, because the BRICS are a interesting group with a great deal of interest in thinking about how to organize the world a little differently. And when I say differently, what I mean is they're looking at the world as it is and aren't comfortable with the power that certain players in the world today have. And so we can make this a much simpler conversation by saying they're not really happy with the way the United States and Europe have organized things. They want to have some alternatives to that. One of those, and one of the great ways to try to do that, is through breaking down the special privilege that the United States has because the dollar is a reserve currency. And more than 80% of all international transactions take place in the dollar. Even more than that, a higher percentage take place in the financial system, which means it has to go through American banks, which gives the United States tremendous power. The BRICS discussion on currency is to think of ways to not break that power, but to get out from under that power. How do we build systems of economic interaction, economic finance, economic payment, and economic production that doesn't force us to enter into the sphere of American influence. And so I think that's what the digital economy or the digital this dialogue is about. And no one knows quite how to do that yet, but there is great interest. And as you know, when the United States under the first Trump administration broke down the Iran deal that had been negotiated by the United States and Europe with Iran, and included Russia as well. When the United States broke that deal and started punishing anyone dealing with Iran, including European companies, the Europeans got very interested in finding alternatives to the system and getting out from underneath the thumb of America. So I think this movement is very powerful. There's a great deal of energy in order to break down this restriction people have of being underneath American influence. And so I think this will continue, but I think that's what the BRICS initiative is. It's harder to do than you think, since you have to come up with substantial financial and technological constructs to allow finance and business to take place outside of American influence. And that's going to take some time to do.
Which country do you think is stronger at dealing with this BRICS initiative?
Which what are
there is a group at BRICS that is discussing this problem, right? So which country do you believe is stronger in trying to convince, I don't know if this is the correct word, convincing the rest or the other members of using something different or to limit the US power?
Yeah. Wow, that's a great question. And there's probably a right answer, but I'm pretty sure I don't know it. In that, of course, by far the largest economy and the most active in trying to take a leadership role is China, because China really looks at itself as an exceptional nation. It has a vision of what China should be and where its place is in the world, and it has a very high opinion of where its place is in the world. So it usually, in any of these meetings, takes a position of leadership and guidance. And so I think they most strongly want to separate from American dominance. Although the Russians have the same passion about this, they're just a much, much smaller player. They have a lot of weapons, but they have a quite small economy. I think they're somewhere down around the size of Italy. So they're not really a major player. But the others, of course, that I think will be influential, the obvious ones are India, because India is bigger, of course, the largest population. And the other is Brazil, which has long taken a position of wanting to be a leader in the international public policy dialogue. How do we think about how we govern the world? How do we think about how we govern the economy of the world? How do we think about trade policy in the world? And so Brazil has taken a very strong position in that, and I would say, we in the United States would say punching above its weight. That is, it's punching as if it's in a higher weight class than it really is. But it does this, and it does this quite well, simply because they are forceful and consistent, at least generally consistent in what they're trying to accomplish. So And I think the BRICS idea is that these nations, none of whom can stand up to the Western nations, when I say Western, I mean the United States, Canada, Australia, and the EU, who seem to be in alliance on how most of this works. And the BRICS are trying to stand up to that. And so the most powerful ones are, of course, the original ones, Brazil, Russia, industry, and China. But I think each is influential in its own way. And interestingly, each, because these nations are so different, there has to be some tension between them because each wants to be the leader. And so there's going to be a struggle that way, trying to come up with a BRICS agenda when each one is looking at it from a different perspective.
But do you think the idea is to separate the United States in this game, or do you think it's to limit?
Yeah.
Limit the actions.
It's I'm not sure. I'm not sure. It's because I have, for my classes, I try to prepare to answer the question, what do the BRICS want? And I'm not sure what the BRICS want, quite honestly, except, as you identify, the question, do they want to limit the United States and the Western power, or do they want to balance it and offer a competing alternative? And so I'm going to go with my fingers crossed, hopefully, that what they want to do is balance it so that we have a better set of alternatives as nations in the world struggling with how to proceed in a very dynamic world with a lot of innovation and a lot of disparity among nations, both economically, financially, but also politically, and struggle together with competing positively proposed proposals on how we work together for public policy. Because as you know, we have a divide. We have the West and the rest. And the rest is increasingly looking like a China-led Eastern alliance. And when you have two gigantic players like the United States and China, and everyone else much smaller, you realize how the odds are of coming to a serious conflict that can't be maintained as a peaceful conflict. Sure. It's just the way human history predicts. So the real question, as we see the Western Alliance and the BRICS arise as a distinct group with the idea that we want something in the alternative to what the West has imposed upon us. We're not sure what it is yet. We haven't a good philosophy or a good plan or a good strategy or a good map of what we want to do. We just know we don't want to be under the thumb of the West. So we want to come up with an alternative. I keep my fingers crossed that they come up with a logical, coherent alternative that is persuasive. And we all have to talk about this and go through the wrestling match to get to a solution where we start to converge on what we agree on and what we disagree on, but what we agree on, so that we can peacefully move forward as we go through this incredible juncture in human society. And think about it. Think about all of a sudden, the movement to democracy has been stopped. There's a movement now to more autocratic regimes, particularly because of the economic success of China. We have Russia going back into an old-fashioned, a 19th century mode of not recognizing or accepting national borders That's a very different kind of way of thinking about the world and has invaded a nation right in the heart of Europe. And we have AI now taking all of this rapid growth in technology and putting it out so that it's going to grow faster than we can possibly understand. This is a tremendously difficult time for heads of state, ministers of finance, ministers of trade, ministers of commerce to get together and try to struggle with how do we move forward, even if we were all together in happy alliance, which we're not. We are now competing on who's in charge. And so there's a lot of strange dynamics going on that create the potential for constructive conflict and destructive conflict. And increasingly, and we're seeing and feeling it in the United States now, as we go into our next election, that there is a distinct possibility that we will be on a constructive conflict path or get ourselves into a destructive conflict path. And that can affect, it certainly doesn't affect just the United States, it affects the whole world.
Sure.
Sorry, I wandered off a little bit more, but I do think the questions you're asking go to this point at this time in human history where statespeople, the leaders of the nations, need to be very aware that the policies they're putting forward will have implications well beyond just, do we have a cryptocurrency? How do we handle digital trade? The implications are much more profound right now.
Mm-hmm. So just to keep our fingers crossed, as you said, right? Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well,
Robert,
I have already asked you lots of questions. So, Clovis, do you have some other questions?
Yes, I have two simple questions, very simple questions. Maybe we could do a parallel. The geographic division of the world and East and West, it seems an old-fashioned way of dividing the world. But digital economy is a little bit different. It doesn't matter if it's West and East or in any place. So it isn't a geographic division. Is it true? It is that way?
Yeah, no, and thank you for asking that because it's very important. I was talking, and I often think of the world as East and West, mm-hmm. But importantly, the greatest part of the world is what we used to call the third world or the developing world, but I want to call it the middle world, because the middle world, and I don't mean middle income, I mean the people in the middle of this great divide between the United States and China. And most of these countries, the vast majority of these countries, are trying to think, how do I work with both of them? How do I take advantage of China and the United States and all China's allies and all the United States' allies? And of course, how do I stay off Russia's radar? No one wants to have Russia be focused on you because that's just a whole different problem. But everyone is dealing effectively with the United States and China. So China is the major trading partner of virtually everybody. United States is the second largest trading partner of virtually everybody. First trading partner for some. But think about it. The whole world has the US or China as first or second in their trading partners. And that means all of the business that they do, and that's what the middle countries care about. How do we grow and produce more wealth for our people? They just want a system where the two big guys are happy, making nice, and allowing us all to use these new technologies to get engaged in these value networks and be able to increasingly produce more wealth for our people. It's a very simple idea. And the problem is, this idea is exactly what was intended in the Bretton Woods system that created IMF, the World Bank, and now the WTO. And it was working really, really well. And not perfectly, of course, but the amount of economic growth, the amount of international trade, the growing spread of wealth among nations that decided, and I put this distinctly, nations whose governments decided that they wanted to grow economically, were willing to pay the price to do that. And by that, I mean, give up some of the power structures that were just extracting wealth from the countries and allow them to open up to much greater economic growth by joining into these value chains. Those countries did extremely well. The whole system was working, and it was working until about 2008, 2010. Of course, the Great Recession the United States caused. I apologize on behalf of all of my American friends for that. But about that, literally, I would say when Xi Jinping came into China and started to think, wait a minute, I have to make China great again, and I have to take advantage of that and continue to do things that especially help China grow even faster. And then the United States really began to realize there is a barrier here. The Bretton Woods system isn't really working with something like China that's so focused on China's industrial policy and development and is gigantic now. The system started to break down. And all of this came to a head in 2016 when Donald Trump jumped in and changed the way America thought about China, or at least identified it very explicitly and began the China war. So when we had this, or the trade war, so we now have this trade war and technology war that has become now an increasingly militaristic conflict between the United States and China, and forcing the middle countries to choose. This is the great dilemma, because now both sides are forcing the middle, who just want to play nice with everybody, forcing them to choose. And the BRICS meeting is the dilemma, because it's easy for Russia. It's harder for Brazil and India because they're middle countries to be the bridge between these two. So I'm hoping that Brazil and India and South Africa and a few other countries can be that bridge between the two and somehow make this difficult struggle work. And that's where I'm looking for solutions. Especially if we elect Donald Trump and Xi Jinping is in for life, it's the weight of this is going to fall on countries like Brazil and India, possibly the Europeans, but they're so busy with themselves. So I'm really looking, to be honest with you, to highly advanced, developed countries that are still developing countries that are perfect characterizations of the middle, India and Brazil, to really step up and take leadership roles to bridge this gap.
Okay, and the last question, is an easy question too. How can we could help our students in future professions? Turning back to the beginning of our interview, for students, for instance, of the engineering area, is a question of studying a little bit more technology or abilities to talk to the others, to understand the others, to see things with the others, or the attitude of imagining a new future and contributing to the future. So it isn't more a question just of technology. Is it true?
Yeah. Wow. I'll try to make it a short answer. I can take several hours on this one. But My short answer is this. Countries like Brazil, countries like Mexico, countries like Turkey that are important and that matter and need to matter and need to take a stronger leadership role, need to focus heavily on their education structures. And yes, of course, they need to focus on the STEM disciplines, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, yes. But you realize if for the way this works, it can't be all about technology. It can't be all about inventing a new kind of silicone chip or a new kind of heart monitor. All of that's important. But you need to also build in training for people to understand history and understand business and finance and understand the complications, the incredibly complicated world of public policy and international trade and diplomacy. So you have to have people that are skilled in all of these things, and ideally skilled in all of these things, at least so they have a good understanding, but that's hard. So the question then is, how do you do this? And it's very difficult for countries to build this up alone because you have to have faculty do this. And where do you get the faculty? Well, you train the faculty. Who's training them? Well, that small little bit of faculty that you have. So here's the key. We need to have a much broader program of internationalization of our education. And that is a lot more American students going to Brazil, a lot more American faculty going to Brazil, a lot more Brazilian students going to Europe and to the United States and coming back as faculty to teach these things. And then a lot of money from the government going into the idea that we need 10 years from now to have an intellectual foundation in our population. And where does that come from? It comes from decisions we make right now. So a long-term plan to make sure that in 10 years, we are competing with Harvard and Yale and Princeton and Stanford, because you want to have that kind of structure in place in your country across those ranges, because all of those things are important.
Okay. Well, thank you, Robert. Thank you very much. Vera, again with you.
Okay, well, I have only to thank you very, very much again for taking your time and availability to be with us one more time. And I really wanted to talk about other subjects later, but we are going to discuss about that and talk to you. Okay?
Absolutely. I love the conversations with you. They're great questions and allows me to spend time thinking and talking about the really important issues of the day. So thank you. I really do appreciate it.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Robert.
Robert.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Muito obrigado. Bye-bye.